We got Kevin Kurz here tonight. So, look at that.
Jeez.
You look like a movie star with that thing. Look at you.
I agree. Photoshop.
NHL writer, previous stop, San Jose Sharks, New York Islanders. But before he got into all that with the writing for hockey, he was in public relations with the Philadelphia Flyers minor league affiliate, the Phantoms, and then also now with the Flyers as well. And now he's back writing about the Flyers as a beat writer for the Athletic. So, grew up in the Pennsylvania suburbs. Mark Howe was your favorite player?
Yeah, where'd you get that from? That
Is that accurate?
Yeah, he was.
That's called research, Kevin. You got to tell these guys about research, right?
Yeah, I did like Mark Howe. And then he was around for forever as a scout, so he was in the press box.
All the time.
Always scouting for the Red Wings, yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
I'm going to turn this down here. Let's get into it here. A little bit about your background. You're going to hear a curtain go behind you here. So you've never been to Rome before?
Nope. No.
Okay, but tell everybody where you went to college.
Ithaca College.
Ithaca College.
Yeah.
So we went to Ithaca College. Not at the same time. Not at the same time.
Are you sure?
But what is it like for you to be back home in an area after being out on the West Coast?
Well, from a hockey standpoint, it's bigger back on the East Coast than West Coast. I was in, San Jose was kind of a non-traditional market, which for me was good because I went from being in PR to media, and it was a little bit more forgiving. I had more time to sort of find my voice out there in a market where they weren't paying as much attention to the Sharks. It was more Warriors, 49ers, San Francisco Giants. So being back here is good. The Flyers are a little bit off the radar right now in the local sports scene, as you know, right? It's a lot of Eagles and Phillies are at the top, and even the Sixers, even though they're pretty awful this year. But in sports, those things can change quickly. In 3 years, the Flyers could be the only good team in town. You never know. So, you have to, as a writer, you have to sort of put that in the back of your mind when you're covering a team that's not very good. It's tougher to maybe generate some, the attention around not just your work, but just yourself and your sort of, people's awareness of you as a writer, as a media person. But I know Philadelphia. I know what this town's like. I know when the team, if the team is good in a couple of years, the fans are going to come back. And, it's more rewarding when you're covering a team, or it's more rewarding when people are reading your work. And, right now it's a little bit of a work in progress, but as you know, this is one of the best sports towns in the country.
So what is it like growing up as a Flyer fan, and pretty much all of Philadelphia's fans? I saw actually on your, I think it was Instagram, you were celebrating when the Eagles won the Super Bowl. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're a fan of Philadelphia teams,
right,
but now you're writing about one of them.
Right, and obviously you're not a fan of the Flyers. Yeah, it's funny you say that because the Eagles are the one team where I kept my fandom, right, and I root for them like anybody else, but I don't want people to get confused by the fact that if I can be an Eagles fan, I can still cover the Flyers objectively, because when the Flyers stink, I have to write that they stink. When there's certain guys that aren't playing up to expectations, you have to be critical. You have to ask the coach tough questions. So what was your question again? How is it covering
Fandom,
a team? Yeah.
Giving up your fandom. You were a fan of the Flyers growing up.
Right.
And all teams here in the area.
Yeah.
But now you cannot be a fan of the Flyers.
Yeah, if I had gone right from, as you said, I worked for the team in their PR department for 7 years. If I had gone right from PR to covering the team, that would have been a little bit more difficult. But because I was removed and, I got to go cover a team that I had no connection with in San Jose, and, you learn right away you have to be objective, right? Obviously. I mean, that's the name of the game. So, being away for 12 years and then coming back to Philadelphia, I didn't know anybody in the Flyers dressing room when I walked in there. So, you're not a fan at all of the team, Now, you say that and people say, well, you kind of want the team to win a little bit, don't you? And when you're watching the games, you really don't, because, you realize that if you're going to cover the team as a fan, you're going to have zero credibility within a week or two, right? And you'll still get the idiots online where when you're really complimentary of something they do, they'll say you're just a mouthpiece for the front office. And then if you're too critical of someone, you'll get the other idiots that say, you're too hard. Why? So you have to sort of learn how to tune that out. But at the same time, you're not rooting for the team to win, but it's better when the team is good because there's more awareness of your work and you feel a little bit more secure in your job, frankly.
Yeah, I always said that I wanted the teams to do well. I wasn't a fan of the teams.
Yeah.
My kids were, but I wasn't a fan of the teams. But I wanted the teams to do well because if they did well, it was good for business.
Right.
Right. So it's good for
And
business.
you don't want to sit through watching a crappy team for 8 months either.
No, that's not enjoyable. All right, they've got lots of questions.
Yeah,
We'll get all their questions. Who would like to go first? Right here. Go ahead, Leo.
How does public relations and journalism marry itself together? And what did you learn in public relations that allowed you to be a better journalist?
Geez, that's a good question.
Hard-hitting.
Yeah, I mean, when I was in PR, I was actually, I was in PR, but then I they sort of moved me into web content, which back when I was doing it, it was like, now teams have 6, 7, 8 people doing in-house content. When I was doing it, it was just really a one-man show where I'm trying to do video and I'm writing everything. And that's a really good question. I mean, in PR, obviously, when I was writing stuff for the Flyers website, when I was still trying, breaking into the business, you can't be too critical. You've got to sort of toe the line, right? And I think at times when I went into the media side, I wanted to break away from that reputation so badly that maybe I was a little bit too critical at times when I was in California. So you just have to learn to walk the line of just trying to be fair. That's all you ever want. And the teams that I've covered in the past, usually early in training camp, I'll try to find by the end of the year, you have a relationship with everybody in the room for the most part. But I try to identify either the captains or the leaders of the team. Like I don't know if you know hockey, in San Jose, it was guys like Joe Thornton, Joe Pavelski.
Yeah.
You try to go to them at the beginning of the year, and I say the same thing every year. I don't know how much you read the clips. I don't know how much you pay attention to the media. If there's ever something you think I'm writing that's unfair, just let me know and we'll talk about it. Everyone's a human at the end of the day. And there's going to be times where you write something and 2 days later you regret it because maybe it was unfair. That's the biggest thing, is just trying to be fair, trying to, making sure that when you're being really critical of someone, you have numbers to back it up, you have maybe quotes from other people to back it up, and vice versa. When you're being especially complimentary, you don't want to, you want to make sure that you're complimenting something that's worth complimenting.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right.
I don't know if that makes sense.
In the back.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of
What
sense.
are your expectations of the Flyers for the remainder of the season? Because I don't really follow NHL, so what are your expectations for covering the? What do you think? Do you think the Flyers can be like a playoff team, or do you think this is more like a rebuild?
Yes, they're still in the middle of a rebuild, so which makes it a little bit more complicated to cover them from a front office standpoint, because they're in the new front office they have is basically in their second year. And in hockey, it usually takes a good 3 or 4 years before whatever they're doing now is either going to work or it isn't going to work. So you don't want to be too critical of them at the moment, because they're making moves that, for young players, for prospects, that they might turn into something and they might not. So that's the complication of covering them at the moment. Now, I would think by next year you'd want to see some results in a positive way. They're probably not going to make the playoffs this year, but that was expected. So, again, you just try to you try to cover them fairly. You don't want to be maybe too negative at the moment because they're still in the early stages of a rebuild. But at the same time, there's things that go wrong, and there were a few things that went wrong last year. I don't know if you followed it all, but they were in a playoff spot for a long time, and then they completely kind of crapped out in March and April. And you have to sort of turn up the heat a little bit, because it looked like a good team, and it ended up being a team that kind of choked away a playoff spot. So, right now they're in year 2 of this rebuild under the new regime. So, you're just trying to be fair, but also keeping a critical eye on things that they do.
All right. Very good. Go ahead, Sean.
How long do you think the rebuild will take?
Yeah, it's a good question. That's what everybody wants to ask right now. I think by next year you'll start to see. Well, I shouldn't say you will. You should start to see some more positive results. By year 3, I would think they're probably going to try and go for the playoffs next year, but they probably don't expect to be a contender for at least another 2 or 3.
Is that Flyer fans are known to be pretty loyal fans?
Mm-hmm.
How have you noticed the fan base, the way the team, the direction of the team?
I think they're really jaded because the team's been bad for a long time, you know. And they had one little brief moment where they were okay in 2018, I guess it was. And sometimes I think I can't fully appreciate how ticked off they are because I wasn't here for that. I mean, I was paying attention to it, but you know, the fans that have stuck. Now they lost a lot of fans too because they, you know, had a general manager that was somewhat incompetent, and Chuck Fletcher. They had a front office that sort of lost their way a little bit in terms of their relationship with the fan base, I think. So part of the reason that Keith Jones was brought in was to repair that relationship between their longtime fans, their hardcore fans, and the organization. So I think that's still a work in progress. And again, you know, they're overshadowed right now by the Eagles, especially. They're always going to be overshadowed by the Eagles, right? This is always going to be a football town, but they're overshadowed by every team, all the other 3 teams, maybe even the soccer team too, at the moment. So, you know, that's going to take. They're not just trying to build a better team on the ice. They're trying to build a better. They're trying to rebuild the avid fan base that they had before, and that takes some time.
Sixers aren't exactly beloved right now,
No.
so you know.
Yeah, I don't really pay attention to them. I know a little bit. Yeah.
Wait a minute. I'm just looking around. Steven, I see you with the Flyers. Anybody else with Flyers gear on right now? Okay, Flyers gear. Flyers, right? Flyers shirt. All right. What do you, Andrew? What do you think? What do you think about the Flyers right now and where they're heading?
I'm going to be completely honest. I don't think we're going to make the playoffs this year. Maybe next year,
Okay.
but maybe not past the first round.
All right. Well, they make the playoffs.
This year?
Yep. No. Is it okay? Are you okay with that?
I'm
Okay.
with it. I see potential in the upcoming years.
All right. Make the playoffs? No. You okay with that?
Yeah, I mean, they look promising for next year, so I'm really not mad about it.
All right. All right. Very good. All right. I saw hands up, so let's go. All right. Let's go in the back.
You might have mentioned this earlier because it's a little hard to hear back here, but what would you say it's easier to do your work with regard to Flyers when they're doing good or when they're doing bad?
Yeah, it's easier when they're doing well, you know, and I'm glad you asked that. So last year was my first year covering the Flyers, and they were good for a long time. They were overachieving. You know, when they're overachieving, you walk in that dressing room, everyone's in a good mood. You're asking guys, hey, why, you know, you're playing so well, and you could go really around the room for a little while there, and so, you know, everyone's going to be chatty when things are going well. They're going to want to talk themselves up, talk their teammates up. It is easier when the team's doing well. You get more, you know, if you're reaching out to front office people, they're more willing to talk to you when things are going well than when they aren't. So for me, that was beneficial because everyone was in a good mood. It helped me sort of build relationships right away. Whereas, you know, if I walk in there and they're terrible and it's like I'm criticizing them right off the hop, they'd be like, you know, who's this jerk that's ripping us all the time? But now that said, like they did drop off last year, so you had to be a little bit more critical. But you know, they're still in a building phase, right? And I think even the veterans on the team right now understand that, and they understand that there's going to be ups and downs throughout the season. But yes, it's much easier to cover a good team. Now that said, when there's so much media these days, and there's, you know, we even get some writers in the press box now. It's almost like they're fans, they're fan bloggers more so than they are objective journalists. When the team's not doing well, that's the opportunity for you to remind everyone that you're here to look at the team objectively and criticize when you think they need to be criticized. So that helps maybe separate you a little bit from, so people, you know, people are looking for their content and the team's playing like crap. Like, well, which writer here is going to tell us what's going wrong and going to be fair about it and isn't going to tell us from a fan's perspective.
So this PR experience that you had the first 7 years with the Flyers, were you an intern and then transitioned from intern with the Flyers, right?
Yeah.
You were an intern.
A PR intern.
Yeah, PR intern. So just take me through that stage, that early stage that a lot of these guys could relate to.
Yeah, I mean, PR and journalism are obviously pretty related. I was a journalism major at Ithaca. I wanted to be in communications somehow. So, PR in a professional sports team, it's more, you're more reactive than, it's not at all like corporate PR. Corporate PR is you're out there trying to pitch things all the time, whether it's products or whatever it is. In pro sports, PR is more reactive, where you're taking calls from publications that want interviews or TV media networks that want interviews. So I would do that for a while, but then when I was doing that, the web stuff started to become more important, the digital media, and like I said before, there's teams now have 8 or 9 people doing digital media in-house, which is a good way to break into the business too, if you can do that. But I gravitated more towards writing the content for the website and producing content for the website.
And your writing for the website is what landed you the job in San Jose.
Yeah, it led that direction. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Very good. Right here. We'll go here first. Okay. Right here. Go ahead.
Tortorella has this perception that he doesn't like the media.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering your thoughts on that.
It's well, okay. He does like to say that, but I think I've covered 5 or 6 head coaches now. He's by far my favorite one I've ever covered because, you'll see there'll be certain moments that'll go viral where he's, being really critical of a writer or it's more so in his past. He's 66 years old now, so I think he's mellowed out a little bit. I think management has probably told him to be a little bit more chill. But when you get him going, when you get him in a chatty mood, he's as insightful as anyone I've ever covered. I think he's honest. I think 90% of what he tells the media is the same stuff he's telling players. I mean, players have told me that. We'll go up to a player sometimes and, we'll ask him about a mistake or ask him about something. He's like, Tort's already told me. And it's like, he tells us the same thing. So that's helpful for us. I don't know if the players always appreciate that. But a lot of times, if you watch his media availabilities, particularly between games where he's a little bit more relaxed, he's great. And he's really only snapped at me once. My relationship with him is fine. If I was just breaking into this business, would I be intimidated as hell by that guy? Probably. But, you have to learn that if a player or a coach or someone snaps at you, if you think it's a fair question, then there's nothing you can do about it. Now you'll get the people online media can never win. If you ask a player or a coach a fair question, and they snap at you or they're kind of a wise ass in reply, everyone online will be like, the reporter's an idiot, and they'll take the side of there's nothing you can do about that.
All right. Go ahead, Alan.
Yeah. So with the Flyers right now, they kind of remind me of what the Red Wings were when we were rebuilding.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think for the Red Wings, are they not too far off from being contenders, or are they still got a ways to go?
They're in the playoffs right now, so that's one of the teams the Flyers are chasing. I don't think the Flyers are a playoff team this year either. But they've put a plan in place, and it hasn't really worked out yet. And they haven't really gotten much luck in the lottery, so I think if you're the Flyers, you can probably look at them and maybe take some lessons on what not to do, frankly.
Have you learned a lot about the league from being on the West Coast and the East Coast
Yeah.
and covering hockey?
Mm-hmm. It's easier to cover the league on the West Coast because the games start at 4 p.m. Whereas, I'm not usually staying up till 1 a.m. watching a West Coast game anymore. It is different out there. In fact, someone texted me today from San Jose and asking about fans being kind of annoying on social media, and I said the biggest difference for me was out west they would get upset at you more for being critical of the players, whereas out here it's almost like they get more upset at you if you're complimentary of players or the front office, which I don't know if that speaks to the two fan bases, but when I first got to California, there wasn't a big contingent covering the San Jose Sharks, and it actually gave me a good opportunity to get in there and sort of make a name right away, because I was going to be critical. I wasn't going to hold back anything, and that's just a product of growing up here, following people like Tim Panaccio, listening to WIP. So when I kind of had that East Coast sort of mentality when I went to the West Coast, and it was, I think, a little bit different for them because they're thinking, who the hell's this guy from Philadelphia to tell me about the hockey team that I've loved for forever? And sometimes it was tough, but I think at the end of the day, it made me a better journalist.
Okay, very good. Jordan, go ahead.
Although the playoffs seem unlikely as we've been talking about so far, has there been any newfound maybe motivations since guys like Konechny and Sanheim and Torts have been playing or coaching in the Four Nations face-off that just had happened?
Motivations for the team?
Yeah, just maybe in the locker room overall, or maybe if they wanted to get that playoff push, because it's unlikely, but they're still within reach.
Yeah, they haven't written it off yet. I mean, they're going to try. They are playing better lately. Are 4-0-1 in the last 5. You know, they've got some players. The older players, I think, are the guys that are going to try to steer it in the right direction because they're here for the long term. But again, I think they all recognize that it's a young team. It's going to take time. Even if they miss the playoffs this year, I think they're encouraged by the play of a lot of the younger guys. So that's what yeah.
Right here.
What are some of the week-to-week public relations tasks that you would do?
Week-to-week public relations tasks.
Yeah, I mean, it depends what your role you're in. So there's the main PR guy or girl is usually in the locker room every day, the one who's facilitating interviews. You know, like today. So today all the writers walk into the dressing room, and by the time we got in, most of the guys had scattered already. But I wanted to talk to Cam York, so you talk to the PR person. Can you go get Cam York out of the dressing room, right? That's the mundane stuff. Sometimes you have to be proactive when certain things happen and try to protect your own players, right? If a guy throws a dirty hit in a game, well, everyone's going to want to talk to that guy afterwards. As the PR person, you try to prepare the player to make sure they don't say something stupid to someone like me, whereas, you say, guy had his head down, he deserved it. You don't want to say something like that. Just be like, I'm sorry he was hurt. So there's that sort of stuff. It's, a lot of times it's just trying to be forward thinking to prevent any sort of disasters. Then there's the PR people that are in charge of like getting the players involved to do community stuff. But yeah, it's changed. It's almost like when I got in, the PR was, I don't know. You might have an interesting take on this. When I started, PR was more important than, digital media wasn't even really a thing. Now it's almost like the digital media departments are much more important than the PR departments because, everyday fans are seeing the stuff that's on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, whatever else, and the art of writing a press release is sort of useless now.
It's almost useless because everything's already out there.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So it's all instant. So because of the social media platforms, that's why digital media is so powerful.
Yeah.
And I loved what you said earlier about being reactive, that you have to react to what's out there and prepare a player. For example, if something's already happened, now you got to react to that moment. Go ahead, Ryan.
What would you say, how important is it to be to humanize athletes as a journalist, specifically in the VR experience? How important is it to have empathy for them?
Very important, very important. I mean, I'll give you an example. Flyers have a guy, Scott Lawton, who he missed 3 games in January for personal reasons, we were told, right? And PR told us why. It was because he had a death in the family, right? Like, okay, no one's going to write that. So can you just keep the guy's privacy, right? Which of course you say yes to. I mean, personal reasons are personal. But he came back. He played a game. The day between, and I have a good relationship with him. Between games, I went up to him. I said, I know what happened. Do you want to say why you had to miss a few games, or you just want to let it go? And he was actually really appreciative because sometimes people jump to conclusions when a guy misses for personal reasons. It could be anything. It could be something bad. He couldn't, as in like he might have done something wrong, right? But he actually appreciated it. It was his father-in-law passed away, and he talked to me for 10 minutes about how much this guy meant to him and what he was dealing with his wife and his newborn son. And he was, he wanted to get the story out there. I think just so people knew that he didn't miss the game for anything, that he wasn't arrested or anything like that. It was just he wanted to explain why he missed the game, and I think he also wanted to sort of, pen a tribute to his father-in-law, who was a very important part of his life.
Okay.
In a situation like that, do you have to like consult the PR person because they told you not to write it for personal reasons? Now do you tell them like, hey, I talked to him, can I write this?
No, I didn't do that. It's a setting where, you know, basically what usually happens is the players practice and they come off the ice, and then we all just sort of walk in. And other teams might be a little bit more sensitive to that, but no, they didn't mind. I mean, and if he and they know I have a relationship with him too. So if it was some writer that they didn't know that walked in from God knows where and they saw him go, they might be a little bit, at least I would as a PR person if I was in charge there. But they know I have a good relationship with them, and if he said no, I would have been like, understood. Yeah.
Go ahead, Johnny.
With your PR internship, what was your role?
I was basically following around the guy. I was following around Zach Hill, who was the PR director at the time. He's kind of a legendary PR guy who just recently retired. I was in the day-to-day in the dressing room with him, sort of learning the ropes that way, dealing with the players, dealing with the sports writers on a day-to-day basis. It was fun. Yeah, it was because it was so fun. That's how I ended up, I think, in the business. Yeah, it was more just, you know, the writers come in, they want to talk to players, and TVs come in. There were more beat writers back then than there are now. You know, back in the day, the Flyers would have probably 4 or 5 traveling beat writers go to every game. Now I go on about half the road trips. Really, there's only one woman who goes to every game. She works for the Inquirer, so there isn't as much media around. Instead, there's more team media. So the PR people don't really have to worry about the team media because they know they're going to be friendly anyway. That was sort of going off on a tangent. So.
Good. Look.
The affiliation that the New York Times has with the Athletic, how does that change your job, or does it change your job?
Yeah, it didn't really change it. The Times bought the Athletic in 2022, early 2022, so 3 years ago. There were some, you know, they pivoted a little bit from time to time just on what we were supposed to do, but I didn't find it to be a hard adjustment. I'm just like, tell me what you want me to do. If you want me to write every day, I'll write every day. If you want me to write a 1,500-word feature every 4 days, I'll do that instead. So it didn't really change much from my perspective. The way they are now, though, there's a lot of national writers, and there's fewer beat writers. They try to have the beat writers just more so in the bigger markets. So I was told maybe 6 months ago, just focus on writing your beat and covering it the best you can. So that's all I really need to hear. It's fine with me.
Does work still get shared from the Athletic to the New York Times?
They print, the New York Times sports section is now the Athletic. Yeah. So it's not so much day to day. It's more so the feature-y type stuff that they'll print.
Your work been in the New York Times?
A couple times, yeah. The big one was last year. I collabed with our writer who's in Ottawa. I don't know if you remember 2003, that game where there was like 500 penalty minutes? With Ottawa Flyers.
Which
Ottawa,
500 penalty minute game? I'm joking. Yeah.
It was the 20-year anniversary, or it was 2004. It was the 20-year anniversary of the game between the Flyers and Senators that had the most playoff minutes in NHL history. So we collabed and talked to all the participants from that.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I know that one was in there.
Yeah,
I don't know what else is. Yeah.
I'm joking, like, oh no, you mean like there wasn't a 500 penalty minute game last?
There was in the 70s, probably. Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, Keegan.
So my big question was, and that previous question kind of leads into this rather well. Beyond the normal beat writing that you do, you know, game write-ups or player write-ups, what kind of stories are your favorite to write?
That's a good question. My favorite ones to write are the stories that nobody else gets. So, you know, for example, I'll give you an example. Like, I mean, the Scott Lawton one was actually nice because that was something that got read by a lot of people, and I was the only one that talked to him about it. Flyers fans know there's this guy Cutter Gauthier that was traded. Yeah. So, you know, the Ducks were practicing the day before the game. I expected at least 4 or 5 media people to be out there to try to talk to him. I was the only one, and so that was I was happy about that because I got I only talked to him for about 5 minutes, but he said a few things that were notable, and that one blew up a little bit. And that's, when you get an exclusive over something that's a big story, about something that's a big story, that's a good feeling, because you're sort of proving to your employers what your worth is. I like doing the featurey stuff too, the off the ice stuff, but sometimes that's a little bit more time consuming, and it's the complication of doing some of those stories is sometimes you just have no idea what people are going to be interested in and what they're not. Even as long as I've been doing this, you don't know sometimes which stories are going to be people are going to love and which people are going to look at the headline and just pass it right on by. So sometimes it's a little bit more frustrating to do. Sometimes it's frustrating to do those stories because you write this 2,500 word feature that you're really happy about, but nobody's really into it. Now, you'd like to think what everybody wants to read, but sometimes you just don't.
So one of the things I think this age group would think is really cool is the relationship you as a reporter have with athletes. What is your relationship like with athletes that you cover?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you get to know some of these guys, and you're like, boy, this guy's a great guy. I'd love to go out and have a beer with him sometime. But you can't really do that. I mean, you can if you're working a certain angle and you're just trying to get, every once in a while, I'll be like, can we, let's go to lunch. We'll talk about this. And it's not like a personal, let's go to lunch and hang out. It's there's a reason for it. You try to have. Most of these guys are smart enough to understand that you have a job to do, that you're going to have to be critical at times, and it's the guys that don't understand that sometimes you have an issue with. Like there was a guy, I won't name a name, but there was a guy on the Flyers that I think you could tell he was reading everything in the media about him, and sometimes if he wasn't playing well, we'd even have press availability sometimes, like, well, the media this, the media that, and we're just like, why the hell are you reading this stuff? Like, you can't, as an athlete, it's almost like you probably don't want to be reading the clips every day. And some guys don't. There's another guy. The Flyers have this guy Rasmus Ristolainen who's in a bunch of trade rumors right now, and we talked to him today, and you can tell he doesn't read anything. He doesn't know. He doesn't care. He doesn't give a crap about stuff that we're writing, and which is great to cover a guy like that, because then you can kind of write whatever you want and not have to worry about it. But yeah, I mean, the relationships are you just try to be professional. There's nothing wrong with going to a dressing room and going up to a guy that you have a good relationship, and where'd you go for the All-Star break? What'd you do? Those sorts of conversations are common. They're frequent. And they do help to build a relationship. But again, I'll go back to what I said earlier. It's like, I as a writer, I only want to know if I've written something that someone thinks is unfair. Because 9 times out of 10, guys know when they're playing poorly, right? So they're not going to be surprised when they read that one of the writers that they know really well is saying, this guy's got to play better. This guy's got to, he made a mistake this way. He did something wrong over here. Most guys understand that. So, yeah. Okay. But I mean, there's also, I try to get cell numbers too, and of guys just in case anything happens. And the thing I always say when I'm trying to get numbers is just, can I have your number? I would only use it in a case of emergency, which basically means like, coach gets fired or you got traded or something like that. You don't want to abuse. I have the numbers of a handful of guys. I'm rarely texting them, because you just don't want to abuse that when they give you your number. You want there to be a level of trust that when they're giving you their number, it's only just in case something crazy happened.
Okay. Hi, Jake.
What was your transition like from San Jose to Philly? Like working with
Yeah, I was in New York first. That was the big one, moving from California to New York. I'd always wanted to get back east just because I think hockey's much bigger out here than it is out there. But I'd been doing it long enough that it really wasn't that complicated. Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
obviously you've been in the business for a handful of years, but what kind of advice would you have, like, being a young guy walking into a dressing room and feeling a little intimidated?
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, it's hard sometimes because if you're a younger writer and you're, a lot of these guys, they're probably going to pay a little bit more reverence to the writer that they know, the writer that's a little bit older, that they probably assume has been doing this for a long time. Like I was talking to someone before this, if you're trying to break in, just identify writers that you like to read, that you think do a good job, and just try to emulate them, right? You don't want to be the guy on social media that's always ripping everybody, or always, saying all the media guys are idiots, or the front office, every trade they make is terrible, every player's playing terribly. You want to be a bit more, if you really want to get into the business, you just want to be more measured than that. Because I've seen younger writers come in, and it's like they think the best way to break into the business is by just bringing all this attention onto themselves because they're being super negative, or so that's what not to do. But if you're privileged enough to go in the dressing room, I mean, just observe what everybody's doing, and don't be afraid to go up to somebody and start talking to them. I mean, that's what the media availability is for.
Good, Sam.
What's the most rewarding part of your job?
I like getting exclusives, like I was telling the other guy before. Most rewarding part of your job, yeah. I mean, it's always a good feeling when you write a story that you think is well done, and
do you pay attention to when a lot of people read your, like, is that a barometer for how good you've done based on how many people read it?
It is, yeah. That's almost sort of like a dangerous route to go down too, because a lot of times you'll write something that you're really happy about, but like I said before, people aren't reading. People might not be reading it. So I don't think you want to judge yourself just solely based on how many people are reading, because I've written stuff that I thought was pretty good and didn't get read, and other times I'll write something that I don't really like and people will read it. So but the rewarding part of the job, that's a good question. I mean, it's always nice when you break news, right? And like I said, get exclusive interviews, because then everybody else that's right, if you're writing something that's exclusive, then everyone that's aggregating it has to mention you and has to link back to your work. I mean, that's always a nice feeling.
Pretty cool. Good, Justin.
What kind of tips do you have for bringing maybe like non-hockey fans to like the Flyers, or just to get to follow hockey in general?
So since I work for the Athletic, it's pretty. We have a. How should I put this? I mean, I don't really worry about that, because the people that I'm writing for are the fans that pretty much have a base of knowledge already. Whereas because I work for the site that I do, we already have a good subscriber base that people are subscribed just to read about the Flyers. And when people are already paying money to subscribe to something, you kind of assume that they already kind of know what the basics of the team and a lot of the stuff that's gone on in the past, and they're at least familiar with what's been going on. So I don't really worry about that. You just hope that at some point, or I hope at some point, if the team does get better, you just want to be in a good position to be able to capitalize on that. So then more and more people do come to read your stuff.
How much of your work is shared all over the Athletic, all subscribers, or because it's one of the unique things about the model is, right, you focus on the market, but then you also get all the other market's material, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, you click on which teams you want to follow, right? Yeah. And then certain stories, if my editors deem them as having national importance, they'll raise them in the algorithm or whatever. So the story about the Cutter Gauthier kid, who was it was the big hot button story of the season so far. I mean, that's a story that had national interest, so they just raised that a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. You already got one. Right here.
What is it like covering like rivalry games? Like I know the biggest one with the Flyers, of course, has been Pittsburgh and Sidney Crosby. What's that like covering those types of games?
Yeah, I mean, right now, just because of where the Flyers are, it's almost like there's not that many of them because they're not really in a position to. They're not like make or break games the way they are right now. That's what playoffs are fun. Playoffs are fun to cover, right? If you don't like covering games in general, you're in the wrong business. I mean, if you're hoping your team that you cover misses the playoffs so you can go on vacation earlier, like you should be doing something else. So maybe that's a negative way to look at it, but it's a lot of games, it's a lot of nights that you're working, so you have to embrace those sorts of situations, just because otherwise it's not as much fun.
All right, let's go over here.
Do you have any tips for when you ask players questions?
Tips for asking players questions.
Yeah,
What do you got, Kev?
you don't want to ask yes/no questions. Yeah, I'm asking them. You're the master over here.
I don't know. I want to hear what you have to say.
I mean, you try to avoid yes/no questions, right?
Double barrel question.
Yeah.
Where you're asking, two questions in one sitting.
Yeah. Everybody's different, right? You walk into a room full of 22 guys. There's going to be some guys that are more insightful than not. Especially a lot of guys that English is their second language, right? So sometimes it depends. It really depends on the player sometimes. I'm kind of at the point where I have my I could get through the rest of the year talking to just 5 of these guys probably, and I'd be fine. But yeah, tips for asking questions. Yeah, it's a little bit. I mean, what I try to do is to get guys one-on-one, so there's not big crowds around them, which is not always easy to do. It's when you're there every day, when you're the day-to-day guy, and you do have a relationship with these guys, it's good to get them. It's better to get them one-on-one because they know that they're only talking to one person, and they know that the one person they're talking to isn't going to burn them, right, or take something out of context. Where, and that's sometimes the frustrating part because fans a lot of times will just they'll watch these post-game scrums where there's 20 people around a player. I mean, those are useless half the time. They don't say anything interesting. And then you see people online, like, these are so stupid, the players say the same thing all the time, right? Well, if you take the camera away from it and it's just a conversation with one writer, 9 times out of 10, the guys are going to be so much more insightful and they're going to give you so much more interesting stuff than if a camera's there. Guy says one wrong thing in front of the camera, it blows up online, right? Or somebody will take it out of context. So, the way I try to do is when I'm writing a specific topic, I try to just get guys one-on-one, guys that I have relationships with, because I know that they'll hopefully trust me at this point.
Go ahead, Logan.
When you're covering a game, what do you take a note of, and what are you watching for?
Yeah, I don't usually write, we don't usually write game recap stuff. But at the same time, you do try to, that's one thing I do try to make sure I do is watch the game and even watch what goes on between whistles. I mean, there's times sometimes you'll just see one little thing happen, whether it's on the bench or in the corner or even during play, that you can create a whole narrative around. So. And that was one thing early in my career, when Twitter was much more prominent, I guess. I see writers still do it today. They'll tweet play-by-play. Like, what are you doing? That's such a waste of time. Most people are watching the game. They don't want to know that so-and-so got a penalty or so-and-so did this. Like, when something big happens, sure, tweet about it. But for me, I think your time's better spent paying attention to the game. I know that sounds obvious, but there's so many little things that happen throughout the course of a game that, yeah, you can pick something up and maybe and if you pick something up that nobody else does, and then you want to ask the guy about it one-on-one later, you could create a whole story out of that potentially.
So you mentioned how it's obviously a little more difficult to cover teams when they're struggling, but in the case of the Flyers, there are, I think, a lot of story points there with the season Michkov's having, and the way TK's among the lead leaders in points, and what they're looking at in the future with Luchenko and some of their other prospects. So, how do you make your stories, despite the team not playing well, a bit more interesting so that it kind of reels in more readers than, expected.
Yeah, less day-to-day stuff. When the team's good, more people are. If you're covering a team now that's in a playoff race, fans are going to be more in tune with what happened in the game. Why did they lose? Why did they win? The way the Flyers are right now is I'm doing less of that. Now, if in 3 weeks if they go on a 10-game winning streak, yeah, then I'll probably write a little bit more game stuff. But if they fall out of it over the last 3 weeks, I won't be upset about that because it'll give me an opportunity to maybe do more, maybe dive into a topic that I've been wanting to dive in on. And instead of writing 5 things a week, maybe I'll just write 3, and I'll take my time and do something that's maybe more of an interesting feature.
Did you say Michkov?
Yes.
You're the first person that mentioned Michkov.
I love Matvei Michkov.
He's got a jersey on back
I know, but
I would show you, but
no
it's my wallpaper
No
right
one
now.
has said anything about Michkov. I was waiting until someone would ask a question about
Yeah.
Michkov. So, I mean, he is the future of the Flyers. What? Give everybody the insight into this young man.
Well, he doesn't speak English, so we don't get much out of it. and frankly, it's something that pisses me off a little bit because I think the Flyers should have provided us with a professional interpreter on a regular basis. That's something they haven't done, and I've criticized them for it. I think it's they have an interpreter there. I think a guy that, but he's not a professional interpreter. I think they should have been. I still think they should have given us an interpreter, like Otani, right, in LA. It's a little bit different because there's a lot more media, but there was a professional interpreter there, right, every day.
Well, that one didn't turn out that well.
The first game, okay. Well, maybe not. That's not the best example. You can tell he's got some personality, but he's still learning English, so we haven't gotten,
So do you have any kind of communication with it at all?
Yeah,
does he go, "Hey Kev," or what does he do? What does he say?
So there was one. I tried. I think I was the first writer to try because you can. He has conversations with his teammates in very broken English, and I did try talking to him once in English. There's a Russian restaurant in Manhattan that all the Russian hockey players go to, and someone told me he had gone there, and I forget the name of the place now, but he came in the dressing room, and you can tell he's got a good personality. You can tell he wants to talk. And I mentioned the name of the restaurant to him, and he picked it up, and I said, good? And he goes, very good, good. As in, he was starting to,
Oh, that's awesome.
and then he said, Mom is better. So that was a great. Yeah, I tweeted it out and it got a good response, and but we can't really, other than that, we don't.
Was that the headline? Ma is better.
Yeah. That was a good. Well, he lives with his mom and his little brother right now, so it's a whole. Yeah.
So no doubt he's the real thing.
I think so. Yeah, I think especially he's been good lately. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he'll be good for a long time.
That's pretty cool. All right, go ahead.
I listened to your episode on Nasty Knuckles. What was that experience like, and do you enjoy doing podcasts?
So I do that. Yeah, I don't know if I want to say this with the camera here. Can we talk afterwards? I can tell you then because, yeah, I like doing podcasts, but there's so many podcasts right now where, and I don't know if any of you guys have podcasts. If you're starting a podcast, make sure you have an agenda of topics you want to talk about. There's so many podcasts I feel like right now. People think you just put 2 people in front of a camera, even if they're well-known people, and having a conversation that gets. So I wish they were had a little bit more focus. But I'm friends with both those guys. That's why I don't want to.
So meet with him afterwards. He can talk more.
Yeah.
Who's next? Right here. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, when you're writing your stories, where do you get most of your information? From the player interviews or the game?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, it's a combination of all of them, right? Especially, if you're being really critical of someone, of a player, you want to make sure you can back it up with either stats or quotes, right? Whether they're from him, the coach, whoever. There's so many stats websites out there right now that there's really not an excuse to find stats that'll back up your argument. But yeah, at the same time, it's a lot of discussions too, and it's not always on the record discussions. A lot of times you're having discussions with players about things that they don't want you to quote them on, or they just sometimes they're just passing along information, or So it comes from all different places. But the most valuable aspect of the job is being there every day, talking to everybody on a regular basis. That's the most valuable. Yeah.
All right.
What made you want to become an NHL beat writer?
I just got sick of doing PR. I didn't like my boss at the Flyers, so I left, frankly.
That person's not there anymore.
Not
by
Zach,
the way.
yeah.
Yeah, that person's not there anymore. And not Zach Hill.
No, Zach was
the greatest boss ever,
yeah.
probably.
Yeah, I get, it was just I'd done it for 7 years and just was time for something new. And yeah, I moved all the way to California because I wanted to try it. I didn't think I'd be out there for 10 years, but yeah, I just wanted to try it. Yeah, it was. Sometimes, especially when you're working for a team, you can't be as honest as you want to be all the time when you're writing certain things. So, yeah.
Okay, very cool. Go ahead.
I was gonna ask, how long does the editing process take? Like, how many editors do you have, and how much are you kind of back and forth when it comes to completing your work?
Yeah, that's. I submitted a story today at 4 o'clock, and my editor got to it right away. It was up by the time I walked in here. So it's usually at least an hour. We have more with the editor. It's more discussions about like what we're working on and what's coming next. Sometimes I'll want to bounce ideas off him. Right now it's a busy time because the trade deadline's coming up. So when we spoke today, it's like, here's our plan for Friday when the trade deadline happens. But for the most part, they leave us alone because they know that we know our beats better than they do. I mean, my editor's in LA. So most of the time it's only, I shouldn't say most of the time, most of the time it's just, you know what the storylines are, you know what you have to do, you know what the expectations are. I'm more just like, just tell me if something's wrong. Yeah.
Okay. All right, Leo, go ahead.
Is there anything innately harder about covering professional hockey as opposed to other sports?
I never really covered any other sports, but I do know that, and Neil would probably back this up, most of the reporters that cover every sport will tell you that hockey guys are the best guys to deal with on a day-to-day basis. They're the most affable, the most accessible. A lot of these guys are from small towns in Canada, right? They're just like, yeah. So that is one aspect of it I enjoy. Hockey people are great people. It's from front office on down. I mean, I've known Keith Jones and Danny Briere for such a long time. They're just quality people. Rarely will you get a guy that's a jerk. I've dealt with a few of them, but 95% guys are great guys, good to deal with. Yeah.
I agree 100%. Hockey players by far are the best.
Yeah.
Baseball is the hardest only because it's every day. That's a really tough beat. Basketball players can be a little challenging as well. And football players, you have limited access to them, so that's not as bad. But hockey guys, I think it's got to be their small town roots in many cases.
Yeah.
From small towns and all over Canada and even here in the United States. Go ahead, Connor.
Hey Kevin, my name's Connor. My question for you is there a certain part of the season that you look forward to covering, whether it's the off season, the draft, or just the regular season?
Training camp's great because everyone's in a good mood, right? Everyone's happy to be back, and everyone's sort of, your promise of a new season, I guess. And it's good just to be busy again. By the time end of August rolls around, I'm kind of bored. That said, I also like the All-Star break when that comes around because you need a break. But playoffs. Playoffs are great. Playoffs are really easy to cover too. I haven't covered playoffs since 2019, really, so I'm kind of starting to lose. Don't really remember what that's like, but yeah, it's almost like, a lot of the players too will tell you, like in January, it becomes a grind. It starts to become a grind where it's games every day, and everyone gets kind of sick of seeing each other all the time. But for the most part, it's, trade deadlines, like right now is an interesting time because there's stuff can break at any moment. it's always nice when the trade deadline's over. You don't have to worry about that stuff anymore. So I'm looking forward to that on Saturday.
Okay. All right. Right here.
Do writers across the league have a plan for Ovechkin's record? Because I know he's like he's 10 or 11 away now.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what our plan is for that, but I know it's going to be the biggest story in hockey in a long time. Yeah. I'm hoping that we're down there in 3 weeks, less than 3 weeks. I'm hoping he goes on a tear, so I have a chance to break it against the Flyers, honestly.
That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah.
Right here.
What's been some of the players' favorite players they've got to talk to when even in Jose or even in the with the Phantoms?
Yeah, it's going to be guys you've never heard of probably, but I don't know how much a hockey fan you are, but
I'm a big Pittsburgh Penguins guy.
Okay.
I was kind of wondering if you were covered their Stanley Cup run with San Jose.
2016, yep,
Yeah.
I was there, yeah.
How was that like also?
Yeah. Well, the first question I'll tell you, favorite guy, Scott Lawton is a very good guy. He's in my top 5. He's a Flyer right now. There's a guy named Brendan Dillon who plays on the New Jersey Devils right now. Joel Ward was a guy on the Sharks. Just, some guys you can just tell are just, nobody dislikes any of those guys. Like, it's impossible. They're just good. It's like they're the kind of guys that, like, you'd be okay if they married your sister, right? And there's a lot of hockey guys like that. Like, you'd be surprised. But yeah, I mean, most all of them are. Like I said, it's rare you're gonna have a jerk.
And what about that Stanley Cup series?
What do I remember about that? I thought the Sharks were going to win. I remember thinking that.
What was the interest level, and how much more heightened were you during that period, knowing that you're writing for?
Yeah. Yeah, it was more fun. It's fun. It's you're definitely burned out by the end. Like, man, you're just like no days off for 2 months. It feels like. But yeah, it's more fun. I mean, and that was a team. 2016, like they were always kind of choking in the playoffs. They'd have these great regular seasons and then would miss. So that was the one season they didn't really choke, even though they didn't end up winning it.
All right, let's end on this note. Advice that you would give to future communication professionals down the road looking to work in the sports business.
Yeah, there's so many different. It's such a weird business right now with all this social media stuff. There's ways to get in now that aren't just when I started out, I was like one of the few beat writers that had never worked for a newspaper. Now there's hardly any of them work for newspapers anymore. Teams they're bulking up their own digital media departments. That's one way to get in. I would say try to intern before you get out of college if you can. That's always a great way to meet people. Whenever there's young writers asking for advice in an NHL press box, I say, don't talk to me. Try to meet other people. Every time you're in a press box, try to meet someone new. Try to talk to someone new. Introduce yourself. Because this is definitely one of those businesses where it's sometimes more about knowing as many people as possible than it is just getting good grades, I guess. Although that's important, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, just like I said, try to find media people that you can relate to, that you like, and try to emulate them. Don't think you have to do anything different or anything super unique in order to get your foot in the door.
Let's give Kevin Kurz a round of applause.